Welcome into the Still Curtain podcast. I'm Josh Yourish with you here on Monday, July 29th. And the Pittsburgh Steelers are 3 days into training camp, a little bit more than 3 days, 3 practices in. They'll have their 4th practice tomorrow, a day off today. And today I'm going to be joined by Steelers beat reporter Brian Batko of the Pittsburgh Post-Gazette. And he's going to give me his first impressions of what he's seen during his time in Latrobe at training camp, boots on the ground. He'll give us his perspectives on Justin Fields as QB1, what the Arthur Smith offense is starting to look like, and we'll get into everything there. But there's a big piece of news I want to get to first, and it's about the offense, but it's not about the quarterbacks. And to call it news maybe isn't true, but it's fodder that's coming out. It's something that's starting to leak, and it's about a Pat Freiermuth contract extension. Is that a good idea for the Pittsburgh Steelers this offseason? And I think it is. I talked with Tommy Jagai when he came on my show. We went through the skill positions over the offseason and kind of assessed where the offense is at. And he expressed some trepidation about giving a contract to a player like Freiermuth. And maybe it's one that you immediately feel a little uneasy about. We ended up comparing it to the Larry Ogunjobi contract, which I don't feel great about for the Steelers, even though they need him on the defensive line. Maybe a Freiermuth extension could be similar, and I felt that way at the time, but now that it's becoming more real, we're getting closer to the season, and that we're starting to hear some reports from training camp that Freiermuth is a big part of the offensive plan with Arthur Smith and is garnering a lot of targets from Justin Fields and ultimately likely from Russell Wilson. I'm turning the corner on it. I'm in on a Pat Freiermuth extension. I think the Steelers should do it. I think they should do it soon. And I'll tell you why. Freiermuth is entering the final year of his 4-year rookie deal. We know this. Last season, he caught 32 passes for 308 yards, 2 touchdowns, played 12 games, had some concussion issues, and missed some time. Was in and out of other games as well. It's not just that he missed 6. It's that the 12 he played, he wasn't a full participant in all of them. He was very limited. Injuries are kind of a concern. But in 2022, when he played 16 games for the second straight season of his career, he caught 36 balls on 98 targets for 732 yards and 2 touchdowns. So he's been a productive tight end, a productive pass catcher. If we just eliminate the tight end moniker, he's been a productive playmaker pass catcher for the Steelers offense during seasons when it's been a disaster. Right? The offense has not been good since Freiermuth has been here. That's not been his fault. He has not had consistent quarterback play, and yet he's produced at a pretty high level. The buzz out of camp is that Freiermuth is going to be a foundational piece of the Arthur Smith offense. For Smith in Atlanta, there was a lot of frustration about what Kyle Pitts is from a fantasy football perspective. But from a football perspective, Pitts was a productive tight end. Maybe not for where he was taken, ahead of Jamar Chase, number 4 overall. But last year, he caught 53 passes on 90 targets for 667 yards and 3 touchdowns. That's a productive tight end season. And on top of that, Jonnu Smith, their tight end too, caught 50 of his 70 targets for 582 and 3 touchdowns. The tight end is an integral part of the Arthur Smith offense, and the Steelers need to lock theirs up. Last season, there was a lot of buzz that came out of the Detroit training camp, the Detroit Lions, that Sam Laporta, who was a rookie, mid-round pick, second-round pick, I believe. There was a lot of buzz. Benjamin Solak, who's at the Ringer, and now he's leaving the Ringer. I guess he made that announcement today. Reported that Laporta was getting every target, much the way the Steelers beat reporters are talking about Freiermuth right now. And that came to fruition in the season. This happens with players. This happens with new players. This happens with new offenses. The camp buzz can be predictive. It can be real. A lot of times it is from a target share perspective. It's not always from a this player is great, this player is bad perspective, especially with new draft picks. But when you're talking about rep allocation, target allocation, opportunity share, training camp means something. The Steelers are throwing the ball a lot to Freiermuth for a reason, because he's going to be a big part of this offense. And beyond just that, beyond just Freiermuth having a productive year this year on the final year of his contract, the Steelers only have 2 offensive players under contract next season who aren't on rookie deals. Isaac Seumalo and Cordero Patterson. You need certainty on that side of the ball. They have none. They don't have either of their quarterbacks locked up. I'm fine with that. A lot of the offensive line is young and on rookie deals. I'm fine with that. James Daniels coming to the end of his deal. The wide receivers, Pickens is still on his rookie deal. They don't have a lot of veterans except for Van Jefferson on a 1-year deal and different guys that they're rotating in and out and figuring out who's going to be the option. I'm okay being in flux at those positions, but you got to lock something up. So why not Freiermuth? And to add to that argument, tight end is one of the most undervalued positions in the NFL. This is kind of Travis Kelce's fault. For some reason, he plays within the boundary of tight end. He's one of the most productive pass catchers in the NFL. He should be making wide receiver money and should have been making wide receiver money for a long time. Now, if you marry Taylor Swift, he doesn't have to worry about money. And he probably doesn't anyways. He's making over $17 million a year. But he could be making 25. He could be making nearly 30, like the top wide receivers are. The wide receiver market has exploded. And Kelce's the highest paid tight end by average annual value at $17.125 million a year, which is about the same as the 25th highest paid wide receiver, Jerry Jeudy, who was just traded to Cleveland for a mid-round pick this offseason, and then they inexplicably paid him that amount of money. Although maybe it's not that inexplicable because wide receivers just make a lot more money than tight ends do. If we look at the top 10 for average annual value at the tight end position, it's Kelce at number 1, TJ Hawkins at number 2, 16.5. George Kittle, number 3, 15.0. Those are, and if you can want to include Dallas Goedert at 14.5 and Mark Andrews at 14, that's the upper echelon, right? Those are the guys you're talking about as the best tight ends in the NFL. Evan Engram is there at 13.75, David Njoku 13.7, Cole Kmet 12.5, which is rumored to be where the Steelers might come in with a Freiermuth offer around 12.5 AAV. Dalton Schultz 12, Noah Fant 10.5. That's the top 10. Now, there's not a lot of world-class players there. There's not a lot of future Hall of Famers there, the way there is at the wide receiver position, but it's still a position it's a deflated market. It's one you want to pay guys in. You get George Kittle for the price of Cortland Sutton. I'd take George Kittle any day as a receiver alone, let alone what he brings as a blocker in the run game. You get Evan Engram and Cole Kmet, who are productive, and even Dalton Schultz, who are very productive, for the price of Darnell Mooney and Gabe Davis and a washed-up DeAndre Hopkins, all at 13, at or around 13 million AAV. Mooney has one 1,000-yard season in a meaningless Bears season, but last 2 years, he was under 500 receiving yards with Chicago. Gabe Davis caught 45 passes for 746 last season. Freiermuth in 2022 was 63 for 732. From a pure pass catching standpoint, you're getting great value. And then add on top of that, blocking in the run game. Freiermuth isn't an excellent blocker. He's not what we're projecting Darnell Washington to be, what maybe a David Njoku is, who's a really excellent run blocker in Cleveland, or a George Kittle, who's the preeminent example of having an extra offensive lineman out there. Freiermuth isn't that, but he adds value on the end of the line. He gives you scheme versatility the way a Darnell Mooney or a Gabe Davis do not at all. And you're getting him for the same price. You should absolutely make that extension. Sign up for that. That's great value. That's smart roster building. The Bears paid Cole Kmet that 12.5, and it was met with some criticism because he hasn't been an overly productive player. And yet you don't hate that contract. Why would you? You're getting a productive tight end at $12.5 million a year, who's an additive in the run game and a quality pass catcher. The same could be said of Pat Freiermuth, even if they come in over that number. Even if they come in at Mark Andrews $14 million a year, I'm fine with that. That's still under what these players should be making. And that's just because no agent can make an argument for their guy to make more than Travis Kelce does a year. And Travis Kelce, for some reason, hasn't made the argument to make $30 million a year, which he should have been for about the last 3 or 4 years, at least in the 20s for the past nearly a decade. That's how good he's been. That's how valuable he is. That's why Kansas City kept him over Tyreek Hill. It's a much better value proposition if Kelce isn't going to ask for wide receiver money like other tight ends have fought for in the past, players like Jimmy Graham, who went into like arbitration cases on the franchise tag because they wanted wide receiver money. Kelce's the one who finally has the leverage to do it, and he doesn't seem to have much interest, which is fine. He's winning Super Bowls in Kansas City. You can't criticize the guy, but you can take advantage of a depressed market that he's created. So pay Pat Freiermuth this offseason. And when you're paying an extension, you always want to do it early, especially when it's a market like this for the tight end position. Extensions go up. Agents look at the last one that was given. They want to go above it. The cap goes up. You pay them earlier, you get a better deal. It's the reality of the NFL. It's something Jerry Jones does not understand at all. And there could be some high-paid contracts coming. A guy like Kyle Pitts. He's at $10 million average annual value right now. That's off his rookie contract. He still has the last year of it, and then 2025, his 5th-year option. But he could sign an extension this offseason. Beyond that, there are some projections out there that look at him as a 4-year, $70 million player. Even though he's disappointed relative to draft slot, that Atlanta front office still believes in him. They may give him that. That's 17.5. That's Travis Kelce money. For a guy who's clearly not as good as Travis Kelce, that's going to bring Pat Freiermuth's price up. So pay this contract before Pitts gets something like that. Pay it before anyone else does. The Steelers need certainty on offense. They need some sense of certainty at all on offense. And while he wasn't reliable last season, I think that Pat Freiermuth could be that for the Steelers this year and beyond. Before we get to Brian Batko, I got to tell you about DraftKings. Hey, Steelers fans, DraftKings is offering a fantastic sign-up bonus for new users. New customers can place a $5 first bet on any sport to instantly claim $150 in bonus bets when you sign up with our code FSBETS. The best part is that you will receive your reward even if your first bet loses. Using our code FSBETS not only gets you these bonuses, but it also directly supports our podcast. If you've been considering signing up for DraftKings, make sure to use the code FSBETS to maximize your first bets. This offer is only available to new customers who are 21 plus and physically present in legal gambling states. Please remember to always gamble responsibly. Check the episode description for the full terms of the offer to see if you qualify. And now, Brian Batko. Brian Batko of the Pittsburgh Post-Gazette to the Steel Curtain podcast. Brian, first, I got to lead off with this question. Who had the better excuse for missing training camp practice yesterday? Russell Wilson with his little calf strain, or you for some pool beers?
Probably Russ. Probably Russ, because he was still at least there in Latrobe. I was a good hour away at my house, but my beat partners at the Post-Gazette, Jerry Dulac and Ray Fittipaldo, were holding down the fort, and I don't know when my next off day is going to be, so I figured I'd get some R&R while, I pretty much knew Russ wasn't going to practice yet. I would like to be there for his first day, in the live team periods, and 4th straight day with no pads before they put the pads on. I figured that was as good a day as any to stay home and lounge around.
So what's your go-to pool beer?
I don't really have one. Yesterday I was trying a variety pack from Brewdog. So I had like a tropical wheat thing, and then my neighbor who is from New Jersey gave me some kind of Cape May Shoretown lager or something. So it was nice. It was a good day. There's just a time and place for everything. I'm probably not going to be drinking the heavy IPAs by the pool. Anything light and refreshing, that'll do the trick.
Yeah, that sounds good. That's probably a good plan. I was wondering if you were mixing in some Donny Football Icy Light mangoes or anything like that.
No, I did have one though out in Latrobe the other day after Saturday's practice over at where'd we go? I think I went to Sharky's, so I had one there. But yeah, that's always a staple of the summer festivities as well.
Yeah, absolutely. It sounds like it was a much needed day, especially because we're heading into really the full on season, and that's why I wanted to have you on to get your first impressions of what you saw the first couple days of training camp. And since we didn't get to see Russ, what's your first impression of Justin Fields in the black and gold?
I think he's been okay. I would say not great, not awful. When we're there in the spring at OTAs and minicamp at the Southside facility, we're really not able to tell you everything we see. That's Steelers policy. Those closed practices are a little different beast than when you're out at training camp and there's several hundred fans watching too. At that point, we can take notes on everything, tell you what we see and hear. I'll just say broadly, I think Justin has looked better at St. Vincent than he did at UPMC Rooney Sports Complex. So that's an arrow pointing up to some extent, but still just, we'll see if the consistency is there for him. I feel like even in the first 4 days or first 3 days that I saw ups and downs, which I guess that was kind of the story with him in Chicago.
Yeah, that's kind of his career.
Yeah, I mean, I feel like his time with the Bears, you just got a sense of, man, this guy's got everything as far as the tools, but does he have it? Does he have that it factor to take that next step? Obviously, they made the decision. Ryan Poles, their GM, and their staff there, that Caleb Williams probably has more of that it factor, and they're going to reset the clock with him. We'll see if one team's, I don't want to say trash, but one team's cast off can be a treasure for the Steelers here going forward.
So before I get your first impressions on kind of what we're seeing from the Arthur Smith offense or things like that, we'll stay on the quarterback position. Pole position is the phrase that Mike Tomlin has used, and he's been very careful to not reveal his hand in terms of the rep allocation or anything like that. And then obviously Wilson's injury throws another wrench into those plans. Do you think there's anything Fields can do to pass Russell Wilson with these added opportunities as QB1?
Oh man, that's going to be a tough hurdle, I think. I mean, I feel like every practice that Russell Wilson misses at least cracks the door open a little bit more for Fields to seize that opportunity. But I just felt like going into this situation, that the timing of everything, all that we heard about how much the Steelers were confident in Wilson, it makes me think that he's going to be the guy, and I'd still be stunned if he isn't week one in Atlanta. But yeah, I mean, just again, for as many days as he misses, that just makes me feel like there's a little bit better chance of Justin Fields kind of storming in from behind and maybe surprising everybody. And that's the other thing I'll just say to keep in mind when it comes to the Steelers and quarterbacks is most of us here in the local media, I feel like, have been saying, no, it's Russ's job. We were here in 2022 when it was billed as a quarterback competition, and we know it really wasn't. Mitchell Trubisky held that pole position from wire to wire to continue to use these racing terms, and Kenny Pickett never really got too much of a chance to unseat him. So we all kind of thought it was going to go that way again with these two, albeit not apples to apples. I mean, Russ is far more established in his career than Trubisky was, and Justin Fields is more established than Kenny Pickett was. So it's still a decent comparison, and yet none of us really saw the Kenny Pickett thing playing out the way it did. None of us saw the Steelers being as interested in Russell as they were. So maybe just expect the unexpected when it comes to the Steelers and quarterbacks. It's been the ultimate reality show over these last couple years, really since Ben Roethlisberger hung them up.
It does seem like there's been a bit of a philosophy shift going to Omar Khan, at least in terms of how they address the position, acquiring Wilson, acquiring Fields. But I agree with you. I'm hesitant to say that Mike Tomlin's philosophy about those types of things would change. And I too expect Wilson to be the quarterback.
Well, that was me who asked him on Wednesday report day about how are you going to divvy up the reps, and he's like,
Yeah.
I'm not going to back myself into a corner. I'm like, and I've been doing this too long for that. I'm like, yeah, you've been doing this a long time, but you haven't been doing the quarterback competition thing a very long time. His first, what it would be, 15 years, he knew who the quarterback was. It was the big guy wearing number 7. So this is, the third year since Ben Roethlisberger retired, and it's only the second time that the Steelers have gone into training camp with really any sort of uncertainty at quarterback, because I would say this time last year, Kenny Pickett was not a proven commodity, but everybody knew it was his team. And there was really no controversy over who was going to get the first team reps or anything like that. So this is only the second lap around the track for Mike Tomlin trying to work this kind of dynamic. And obviously he didn't want to get out in front of it. But again, now looking back, as we were sitting there in that press conference room, they just finished that conditioning test with the bike riding, with the running, with the sled push. So maybe he knew even at that juncture that Russ might not be out there for day one.
So that sparks another question in my mind, because you're right. This is the second go round with Tomlin trying to establish a new quarterback, maybe develop a quarterback with Fields, if that's the case. How do you feel he handled the process the first time around with Pickett and Trubisky and even Rudolph, if you want to consider him a part of that? And how do you feel like he's handling things now? Because he's not proven in this aspect of the coaching world.
Yeah, I mean, I feel like it's too early to say now how this is working out. But
I figured that would be the case with this one. But going back to last time.
Yeah, but as far as the Kenny Pickett, development curve or whatever you want to call it, I didn't think that was handled that well. I don't see eye to eye with the way it all went down with Kenny. I mean, I certainly don't think he played his cards right, but in the end, maybe it was the best for them to go their separate ways. And I think even in the beginning, I could see why maybe Kenny and his camp weren't thrilled with the way that all worked out. I mean, he was established as the third quarterback from the jump in St. Vincent. He said many times that he thought that might have hurt him once he became the starter, and why he had such a slow start being inserted in the halftime of that Jets game week 4 a couple years ago. And I can't really blame him for that. I mean, he didn't have many reps with the starters. And I still think the timing was weird of when Mike Tomlin ripped the Band-Aid off with Trubisky and sat him down. Again, we know there was some stuff going on behind the scenes with him and Deontay Johnson, and maybe that was the first flames being stoked of Johnson becoming a locker room problem. But still, I mean, I just thought it was a little impulsive back then from Tomlin, and it didn't really put Kenny Pickett in the best position to succeed. In retrospect, maybe there wasn't a ton that he could do. Maybe Kenny just wasn't ever going to be able to succeed, at least with Matt Canada as his offensive coordinator. So there's a lot of unknowns there. It'll make for some really good fodder someday when these guys aren't as close to the situation, and maybe everybody can be a little bit more candid about what was going on there. But yeah, I'd just say generally so far, one first-round draft pick quarterback, maybe it wasn't Mike Tomlin's call, but at least in terms of putting that guy in position to be successful, I wouldn't say it's gone great thus far in the post-Ben era.
Yeah, that always felt like a panic move to throw him in against the Jets. It never made sense as the situation to do it.
And then the next game is at Buffalo. I mean, that's about as difficult of a pressure cooker as you can put any rookie quarterback in.
Yeah, and then it makes it hard to take him at his word when he's saying, I've been doing, like you said, I've been doing this too long to back myself into a corner, like he's hiding all of his cards and knows how to maneuver the situation. He didn't really prove that last time, and it'll be interesting to see how he handles it this go round. The other big change, obviously, you mentioned Matt Canada. Now we're in the Arthur Smith era. What are your first impressions of, obviously it's limited, but what you've seen from that offense, or at least what resembles an offense when they're playing football in shorts?
Yeah, I mean, it's pretty much what you'd expect. I think. I mean, a lot of throws to the tight ends. Pat
Mhm.
Fryermuth's been eating out there. He's had a full plate in the practices I've seen. Maybe some more screens to the running backs than were in the playbook under Canada, but still some vertical concepts with Arthur Smith's offense, and I think that too was a staple of what he was able to do in Tennessee. Everything kind of went to crap down in Atlanta,
Yeah.
partially due to the quarterback play, which he's not absolved of. I mean, he was ultimately a big piece of trying to figure out that part of the puzzle. But there's a difference between roster building and then scheme/play calling. So he kind of hamstrung himself when it came to Taylor Heineke / Desmond Ritter / Marcus Mariota being such an integral piece of what they were trying to get done down there. If he's got a better setup with Russell Wilson and/or Justin Fields, then maybe he can be the guy that we saw with the Titans, who vaulted himself into a head coaching job after just 2 years calling the shots for their offense. He was a riser. He kept getting promoted from job to job down there in Nashville. So, I mean, I still think there's some optimism that can be had with Arthur Smith. And, I generally like the way he's kind of scripting things thus far in camp. And, I think he is going to play to the strengths of their personnel. Every offensive coach says that. Matt Canada said that a lot.
Yeah.
So we'll see. I mean, I think it does. And this is a big reason too why I think they hired him was what he wants to do and his sort of identity that he's come up with for himself as an NFL coach. It does vibe with the players that are already on this roster, the way the Steelers have been built when you look at Najee Harris, Jalen Warren in the backfield. And then, those guys I mentioned, Pat Fryermuth at tight end and George Pickens on the outside, able to stretch a defense.
So when you mention those vertical routes, and obviously I'll stop couching everything and it's very early because obviously it's very early. Did you see a tendency to want to attack the middle of the field a little bit more? That was kind of his bread and butter with Tannehill and something he did in Atlanta to varied success with quarterbacks like Ritter and Heineke and whatnot. But that's not something that's been a strength of Fields or Wilson throughout their career. So I'm curious personally if the verticals are going to be down the sidelines, which those guys have thrived on a little bit more, or still trying to get at the heart of what that system is, pulling linebackers down and hitting it right behind them.
Yeah, we'll see. I mean, we've seen Justin Fields hit some deep ones down the sideline so far out in Latrobe. Russell Wilson, I mean, I think that's definitely still a club he has in his bag is that deep ball. I mean, he made a lot of money with DK Metcalf on plays like that when he was with Seattle. Did he have that kind of guy in Denver? I mean, Jerry Jeudy, he ends up getting traded to Cleveland. I mean, I wouldn't say they had the best receiving core out there with the Broncos. Still had some pieces. I still think play action too. I didn't mention that. I think that'll be a big part of what Arthur Smith is trying to do as well. And that's easy to establish if you're running the ball for 4, 5, 6 yards on first down with that offensive line and Najee Harris or Jalen Warren banging through the middle. So I think there's going to be some of both. I think using the sidelines will be more of something Russell Wilson's capable of. I mean, he hasn't like you said, hasn't always been the best at throwing over the middle. And I think that's just kind of inherently comes with his lack of size at the quarterback position. I mean, that's just physically more difficult for him to do at 5'11", just under 6 foot. So does he still have the mobility too? I think that's a big question. That becomes even more of a question after this calf issue. I mean, I don't think it's going to be anything that lingers too long. And, I do believe Mike Tomlin when he says it's minor and they want to prevent it from becoming a more significant issue. But man, when you've got a 35-year-old quarterback who gets off on the wrong foot in training camp after the conditioning test, I mean, I think we've seen it in recent years with Aaron Rodgers. We've seen it with Kirk Cousins, guys who get up there in age, the soft tissue stuff or even just lower body stuff in general. I mean, you've got to be careful with that. And you've got to worry, hold your breath probably a little bit every time he tries to extend a play, sneak out of that pocket and try to keep the ball or do something with his legs.
Even a younger guy, Joe Burrow, last year had kind of a calf strain and it lingered and hurt him. It seems like, I mean, you talked to Wilson and other people have talked to Wilson. He said he'd play if there was a game this week. He feels that healthy. Do you have concern about injuries with him throughout the season? Because he's been surprisingly durable for an undersized guy.
He has. There was a few years ago where he actually remember it was the Steelers who missed him in Seattle. They ended up getting Geno Smith because Russ was dealing with a finger injury.
Yeah,
from
and
hitting
that
somebody's
was the he ran the
TJ,
fake
yeah.
game in the
Yeah.
pregame and everything like that.
Yeah, he did his warm up routine at then Heinz Field, now Acrisure Stadium, and then as so many Steelers games do, I believe that ended with TJ Watt just demolishing Geno Smith, right? And the Steelers were able to pull that one out. So yeah, I mean, Russ has been a workout warrior throughout his career. He is a guy that has been able to play through pain. He is a guy who's been able to make those just ridiculously fast comebacks when he does get dinged up. So, I mean, I think maybe the push-pull here is Mike Tomlin trying to save him from himself a little bit. Like, hey, don't overdo it just so you can get out there on day 3 of camp instead of day 5. You know, we know that you want to get the reps with the guys, and I certainly applaud Russ and tip my cap to him for, you know, being there for basically all of OTAs and mini camp. I don't think he missed a single day. You know, so that showed a commitment for him to get those early reps. And it probably showed the foresight of, hey, it's unpredictable. I don't know how many days off I'm going to, you know, want or need in camp. And I might as well get these early reps with the receivers, with the tight ends, with the running backs. And I've heard, Josh, that he's even out there, you know, well into the evening, like once all us media are gone from the practice fields, he's still down there at St. Vincent, you know, getting work in with certain position groups. So he is putting in that time. But I mean, at his age and now with this, yeah, I mean, I do think you have to wonder, is he going to be as durable as he was earlier in his career when he was a younger man? Father Time catches up to everybody eventually, except for maybe Tom Brady.
Yeah, he seems to be the one lone exception to that.
And even he's retired now, so he saw the writing on the wall eventually.
Yeah, he got out before he lost that battle. You mentioned the wide receivers. You mentioned Freiermuth being kind of a focal point, and that's interesting to me, especially with the talks about maybe a contract extension to him.
Yeah.
Going back to this first impressions thing, what is your first impression of kind of the hodgepodge of wide receiver twos that they have amassed throughout the offseason, and maybe Roman Wilson as well, if you can work any observations you have of him in that?
Yeah, I definitely can, because he was another guy who, like Fields, you know, I wasn't overly impressed with him in OTAs and mini camp. You know,
okay.
Yeah, so you can't quite come out and say that as strongly as you can now in training camp, but I actually think Roman's looked a lot better here out at Latrobe. I don't know if it's just something of being a gamer when the fans are around, you kind of get the juices flowing. I mean,
yeah,
it's probably tough a little bit to come down for somebody like him who, I mean, you think about his last season at Michigan. I mean, once they get the 4-0, 5-0, 6-0, and obviously once you're in the Big Ten championship game in the college football playoff, every single game is the biggest game of your life. And then, you know, you go through the draft process, the combine, you're trying to work out, trying to, you know, get your fastest 40 time that you possibly can. He was probably overwhelmed a little bit once he got to the speed of the NFL, even in football and shorts in mini camp. And, you know, he's getting coached hard by the new guy, Zach Azzani, who we've seen with George Pickens. He is not trying to back off at all. If anything, he's, you know, trying to up the ante a little bit for those guys in that room as he's making his first impressions on everybody. I think Roman's getting open. You know, he's making contested catches more than I saw in his first practices as a Steeler. And, you know, I don't think he's going to be the number 2 this year, but I think he's carving out more of a role as a potential slot guy. Van Jefferson's been the one who I think's been most noticeable in the competition for that number 2 role. And it might even be by committee with him and Calvin Austin. They're very different players. Of course, you know, the frames are much different. Jefferson's a good 6'1", 6'2". I mean, he just looks like your creative player, wide receiver, for better or worse. You know, nothing stands out a ton, but also no glaring weaknesses with him. And Calvin Austin, just not a traditional number 2 wideout, but I think he's versatile enough to line up on the outside. You know, if he runs a go, he'll either be open or he's going to attract some attention because of that just raw speed that he has. And we know he can do some of the shifty underneath stuff. You know, I think he's got to prove that he can get off a press, get open, you know, make some of those tough catches over the middle when he gets hit, if he wants to be that guy. But so far, so good, I think, for those two as they try to hold off the temptation for Omar Khan and company to swing a trade and bring in just another big dog alpha type guy behind George Pickens.
That's interesting that you mentioned Roman Wilson kind of struggling early on, because something people have talked about in draft cycles, and it came up this specific year with Marvin Harrison Jr. not doing any testing, is these guys aren't preparing for football after their college career ends. They're preparing for the combine to get drafted as highly as they can. So that's good to hear that he's kind of hitting his stride now and settling in.
And you know what? It could be an ebb and flow, because now Tuesday the pads are going to go on, and we'll see if he's ready for some of the physicality. That's the thing about him, is he's a pretty slight guy, and I didn't really take that into account with him in the like draft rankings and stuff like that. I was pretty high on him coming out of Michigan, but once you see him in person, not a ton of muscle mass there, which I always feel awkward about saying, because like, who am I? I'm a sports writer who Roman Wilson would just absolutely torch me in anything physical, obviously, but just relative to the other guys on the team and in that room. And, usually you see that jump from rookie to year two. But at least for right now, I mean, he's only slightly bigger than a Calvin Austin. So, it'll be an interesting challenge for him to kind of keep it up when he's in those one-on-one corner receiver drills, whether it's route running or blocking, because that the vets are going to try to get into him and make life uncomfortable for him.
Do you think there's any chance that we do see the Steelers swing a trade? That's something everyone's loved to talk about all offseason, and I haven't really engaged with it because I haven't felt it's been very real at any point. Do you feel like there's any possibility?
Yeah, there's a possibility. I think there's always a possibility with Omar Khan, because I think his MO is to maybe be a little bit more aggressive, or at least a little less risk averse than Kevin Colbert was. And I think that's partially due to just the circumstance that they're in. I mean, back then, Kevin had Ben Roethlisberger, and I think there was a lot of, hey, he can elevate the guys around him. Let's just not do anything to screw this up, because this window is going to be open for a while as long as we have the franchise quarterback. With Omar, I think there's more unknown. Again, I'll go back to the word uncertainty. There's more of that. So, maybe don't be afraid to push your chips in the middle at a certain point, or at least make a quote unquote big move that could pay off in the short and the long term.
Do you see a Freiermuth extension coming soon?
I do. I mean, I wouldn't bet the house on it or anything, but I think if I had to bet one way or the other, I think it'll get done, because again, the short and the long term, I think he's a guy that's going to be a key piece for this team in 2024. I think he's going to continue showing his value out there on the practice field in Latrobe, but also once the games begin. And, while the health issues with him are real, and you wish he could have, been a little less injury prone these last few seasons since he came into the league, and even at Penn State, he had some injury issues. I just think that tight end it's such a crucial part of what Arthur Smith wants to do with his offense. And while he's not in the top tier around the league, he's not God tier George Kittle, Travis Kelce, and those guys. I think you can make a good case that when he's right, when he's physically right, he's in that next tier with some of the guys who have gotten paid.
Yeah, certainly very few are. And I've liked what I've seen from Freiermuth in the NFL. And if his health turns around and he's able to stay on the field more, especially like you said, he's been gobbling up targets, then we could see a big year, and I wouldn't be surprised by that at all. The rookies, and maybe you can, if there are any free agent additions that have jumped out to you in a big way, what rookies have impressed you in your first impressions?
Peyton Wilson would be one. Deshaun Elliott, who was a free agent pickup this year from, Miami. He said Peyton Wilson is maybe the most mature rookie he's seen in terms of getting his body right, preparing for practice, the way that he carries himself. And on one hand, you'd expect that from a 24-year-old, sixth-year guy who played as much as Peyton Wilson did at NC State. But on the other hand, I mean, he is still a third rounder, and you love to hear that for someone who's probably going to be relied on to contribute to some extent this season in that linebacker rotation, even if he's not a starter ahead of Patrick Queen and Elandon Roberts. I mean, you could see him in there on certain nickel packages. I certainly think you could see him in there as a dime linebacker like Roberts Spillane. That used to be his MO, his bread and butter on this team, was to play as hard as and smart as you possibly can on those obvious passing situations, third down, be the pass coverage guy who keep things in front of you sometimes. Maybe you give up an 8-yard catch, but if it was 3rd and 10, you did your job. So
Yeah, that's fine.
I think Peyton Wilson, he's got the kind of skill set to be that, and obviously potentially more as he progresses in his NFL career. Beyond him, Troy Fautanu, I wasn't there on Sunday, but it sounds like he got more work with the first team and looked pretty good doing it. So that's encouraging as well. We'll see if Roman Wilson can continue to make some of those strides. And the one who I think's been quiet so far is Zach Frazier. He hasn't really had the opportunity yet with the first team. I wouldn't say he's particularly stood out with the second team, but that's very tough to do, especially, for a center when you're not in pads yet. Maybe he's going to start getting nasty here Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday. And then the Friday Night Lights practice out in downtown Latrobe is always interesting because usually a big crowd. You see what rookies rise to the occasion. Zach Frazier and Mason McCormick, maybe they can start, pushing people around, moving some bodies on the interior this week.
And then the last thing before I let you go, and this has been fantastic stuff. Who's the slot corner in week 1?
You know what? I should have mentioned him because he is a rookie. I just didn't come to mind because he's not a draft pick, but Beanie Bishop, undrafted guy out of West Virginia. I think he is going to win that job. And, a lot of people were raising their eyebrows on Thursday, the first practice of camp, when he was in there with the first team. I was not surprised because I saw it start to materialize at the end of mini camp. And I asked him about it, and he did confirm that he was running with the first team a little bit, those final practices in June. So that was even after the Cam Sutton signing, but before we knew he was going to be suspended 8 games. I don't know that the Steelers anticipated it would be that long for Sutton. So, I thought they might make other plans, and they still could. Somebody like Chandon Sullivan, who I think was, okay last year, obviously not good enough that they wanted to continue doing business with him right away. But, he's somebody who's still floating out there, I believe, in free agency. But if Beanie Bishop can, prevent the Steelers from making another move like that, I think he's clearly running ahead of guys like Josiah Scott, Grayland Arnold. They're journeymen at this point of their NFL careers. They might not even make the roster. So Bishop's a guy who really like the potential of what he can do there because of his body type. He's a little angry man, as he put it, sort of similar body type to Mike Hilton. He said he's been watching his film. He hasn't done a lot of blitzing and run stopping in his college career, but he played on the outside at West Virginia and had a lot of ball production with 4 picks, I think 23 PBUs. So that should at least translate from a coverage perspective. A lot to like about Beanie Bishop trying to win that nickel role.
Yeah, that's a position where the Steelers seem to always find a diamond in the rough, and maybe they've found another one. Excellent stuff. I really appreciate the time, and we'll continue to read everything on the Post-Gazette as you go through the rest of training camp and into the season. Thanks a lot, Brian. And that'll do it for the Steel Curtain podcast today. But before you go, I'd like to remind you, if you're a fan of the Pittsburgh Steelers and would like to support the Steel Curtain podcast, please consider subscribing to the Steel Curtain podcast on YouTube. We really appreciate your support. We appreciate you listening today because we got some great stuff from Brian Batko, and we'll be back next week with a little more insight into what this Steelers team is going to be as they put the pads on tomorrow for training camp, and we'll be even closer to the first preseason game. I can hardly believe it. We're going to see actual football soon. Till then, we'll talk next week. Go Steelers.